the whole approach, regulatory approach, needs to rest on balance.
In a leadership position, how do you learn how to distinguish those people who are actually coming to you with a genuine request for the industry and those who are actually, let's say in their case, trying to safeguard the interests of their clients only?
Our operators were generating loads of data. Okay. So every claim could be contrasted with data. If not, I would kindly request to be confronted with any data.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of the SiGMA podcast presented by myself, Trevor De Giorgio. Today, I'm really happy and pleased to have with me Juan Espinosa, who currently runs his own consultancy, his own firm, Silverback Advocacy. But for maybe a few of you, you might be aware that Juan Espinosa was actually the former Spanish gaming regulator. He occupied that position for 3 years, and he was also deputy regulator, a position he also occupied for 3 years. So you can say he had 6 years in the main decision-making process in Spain. In those 6 years, Spain also had discussed and pushed forward a new online licensing regime. And today, we would like to understand better the journey which Juan and his team went through at the DGOJ when they were going through this process. Juan, I'm sorry for the lengthy introduction, but you have done a lot in your career.
No problem.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be a guest on the SiGMA podcast.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for your generous intro, and thank you for having me. Overall, it's a great pleasure to meet back after some time with old friends like yourself and respected professionals at the same time, since that is actually possible. So great. It's glad to be here and glad to be part of your podcast series.
So, Juan, you were regulator between 2017, 2020, deputy regulator between 2013, 2016. Can you explain to us the journey going from an idea of regulating towards finally actually regulating the industry?
Great. Yeah, I will try to, and I will try to be as brief as possible. But let me just summarizing. It was and has been quite a journey, still is, from what I know. I think in Spain, you can recognize this country, Spain, or the approach that took part some 10 years ago as one of the main first ever jurisdictions to have developed a point of consumption system of licenses. Back in the early 2010s, you had Denmark, you had Italy, France, and Spain. That was pretty much about it. And of course, this was the consequence of several contingencies, such as, and I will restate a very strong contingency, namely the rumor that we had back in the day, which didn't end up taking place anyway, but the rumor that the lottery companies, which is the state lottery company in Spain, the main flagship in gaming, was to be privatized. This didn't take place, but you have to bear in mind the context of the whole thing. And of course, the second contingency was the reality that we were going through in Spain as elsewhere, that gaming and betting had taken over digitally. Okay, and so we had all kinds of brands being advertised in our football league, people getting acquainted with the betting activity really via digital, because in Spain, except from the region of Madrid, we had no, and the Basque Country, betting shops were not a reality back then. So this was the way that the gaming sector as a whole introduced or deepened in Spain. So it came the moment to really develop this assimilation in an orderly fashion, and the government, and after the government, the parliament set out to pass a gaming act, just as elsewhere, where we were in charge of implementing the regime. Okay, and this is where I more or less happened to land in the regulator. 7 years overall, 3.5 years as deputy, 3.5 years as head of the whole thing. And the process was, I will really summarize it in, from the very early phase, which barely we had to do we were involved in trying to make the regulated market a reality, sort of trying to divert and generate as much regulated traffic to the regulated operators and licenses to be as possible.
The famous channelization, right?
Yeah. This was the first phase. The second phase, I would say, is the phase where you, and we can get into details, but is the phase where you look into how the market is performing, not only in terms of pure economic terms, of course, but also in terms of policy outcomes. And you say, okay, we're lagging behind in this, we need that, we need this other thing. So there came a phase of, say, 2-3 years consolidation, we might term it, where we tried hard, not always achieved, by and large we did, but not always achieved, to optimize the policy outcomes that we were endowed with when the legislation was passed. And I would say there was yet another third phase, which was the phase that lasted or ran along the lines of the last couple of years in my mandate, where, and I'm sure you can see this in other jurisdictions, I do see it anyway, where the gaming activity as such started to be increasingly contested socially, even politically. There was a lot of turmoil going around and a lot of hype, of course, as well. And you, as a regulator, had to, in a way, step up and try to develop some orderly patterns and guidelines so as not to give away to this, let's say, undermining climate, which in the end is not good neither for the operators nor for the regulator and the citizens.
And neither for the consumer. And this is what I wanted to get to next, because you spoke about journey and phases. Now, getting to regulation is one part of the journey, but developing and maturing that regulation, adapting it in order to make it better, is a whole different journey. And unfortunately, outside factors start playing into it. Social pressure, media pressure, where to a certain extent, sometimes, in order to be sensational, not the exact facts are given in certain situations. Now, one understands that certain measures need to be taken by a regulator in order to, let's say, protect the citizens of that jurisdiction. They take many forms. Sometimes the easiest options might sound the best, like advertising restrictions, but in reality, you're then opening a can of worms. So, if, for example, you introduce advertising restrictions, but then at the same time, non-licensed operators with God knows what sort of technology, God knows what sort of return to player, still advertise on the internet, still push their product, there's no enforcement against them, then you're going to have a problem because your citizens are going to be exposed to an unlicensed, unregulated product, which could actually harm them, could harm them a lot. So my question to you is, how do you juggle that reality with the pressures coming from you on the media side, 99.9, the politician side, because not many politicians, unfortunately, take the time to understand the industry. And many politicians think that it's easy to kick the industry, when in reality, by doing that, they might be causing more harm than good.
Okay, wow, that's quite a question. I will start by the end. You do juggle, great analogy, by the way, you do juggle this frenzy by being present and leading okay, there is no way that not being present for a regulator is going to ever work. And by being present, I mean both vis-a-vis society, your political interlocutors, and also the industry.
It's important to lead from the front then, right?
Yeah. This said, I would say, and this is a thing that really, really resembles all over any digital sector for that matter, but of course in gaming and betting, it is absolutely a must. The whole approach, regulatory approach, needs to rest on balance. Balance, it's a mixture of things, okay? It's not that I can speak on behalf of my country or my experience, and maybe you can really extrapolate this to another reality, but by and large, the questions that you need to ask are the same anywhere. You have some tools, which is enforcement, which is how far you can enforce rules. This is important. This is something that affects overall balance, because if, as you said, there's only so much that you can do in terms of enforcement against the unregulated offer. This you need to take that into account, and because otherwise you're going to defeat your purpose. But there are more things to.
If you don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you here because I want to have free flowing as well. I was seeing some of the sanctions which the Spanish regulator took, action it took in May, if I'm not mistaken, May of this year. There were a couple of €5 million fines to non-Spanish companies, without mentioning the jurisdictions, but non-Spanish companies actively targeting and advertising in the Spanish market. But are those €5 million collected? Does it have an impact? Because if at the end of the day you don't collect the money, then the fine is a bit useless, if I may say so.
Yeah. Well, this is a difficulty that not only this regulator or my home regulator, but
no, it's regulators in general have this problem to collect.
And it is an absolutely fair point. In digital environments, delocalized, even though economic environments that are subject to territorial licenses, the enforcement muscle can only go that far. In terms of collecting fines, it is always a challenge. And let us put it, let's say, fairly and lightly. It is not always the case that these fines end up being collected. Let's leave it there. Okay. So, of course, you lose a deterrent if you are not to collect your own fines. You have another deterrence as well, such as the inability to, in due course, for this license, not licensees to access any license of yours. But of course, the fine is an important element. Well, if I may, Trevor, this is but one side of the equation. Of course, you need, even without discussing the outcome, which needs to be from a public perspective, public regulator perspective, let's keep consumers protected. You need to strike certain kind of balance, because you have economic elements, costs and burdens, economic elements that have an impact in the regulated operator's activity, taxation issues, the requirements and measures and regulatory constraints and obligations that they are imposed, reporting obligations, of course, operational requirements that may be related to the measures, regulatory measures and policy measures that you implement. And you have to take all this into account on the one side, and on the other side, you need to retain as much portion of the real market within your regulated offer as possible, because otherwise the degree of effect that your measures end up having in the consumer is less and less. So you need to strike the balance. Always, this is not something that is proprietary to our industry. It is the same stuff in many other digital industries. So I think it is right to say that there is a challenge for regulators, even without discussing their policy options, to keep this balance. And this is a dynamic thing. And I will stop.
you mentioned talking to other regulators, talking to operators. Now I remember in my previous job, I remember that a couple of meetings which used to take place, there was a group of European regulators. So I remember yourself, I remember the Italian regulator at the time, Francesco Rodano. I remember Germany was present. I remember, I believe, Denmark was present, Belgium, I think France to a certain extent. I don't know if the UK was present. Malta was not present at the time. And there were meetings, and I remember that is actually where I met you the first time, at one of these meetings where the industry was brought in order to discuss and give their perspective on the market, on how regulated markets were evolving, because we were shifting from .com to .country, at least on a European level. Whether that was done right or wrong, I think we still have to see. But at the time, we were talking. There was a lot of talking going on. How important is it for regulators to talk with each other, but also for regulators to talk with their own operators?
Okay, this is precisely part of where I was coming from when I was saying that you need to lead and be present. Okay, this is part, as far as I understand it, anyway. This is part of your function. Establishing the adequate links, if you maybe in lack of the word, information and exchange links with both your fellow regulators and your operators. Okay, let me just say that this is sometimes an uncanny position to be in, because at the very same time we are so-called regulators, but at the end of the day we regulate only thus far. It is for the parliament to regulate. It is for other people in the government to give the waiver to regulation, and what we are is enforcers as well. So wearing these two hats at the same time sometimes can be uncanny, can be strange. Some, let's say, ethical lines need to be drawn and how to behave yourself. But in this environment, it is really important to anticipate and to let operators know, and of course, nurture yourself. Let us not forget, we are talking about a highly technical industry, gaming and betting. So you need to be fed into the developments that are taking place, the evolution of all this stuff, and the experience that the industry is having, because you need to test, if only internally and informally, in lack of a better test, you need to test if your solutions are going to end up working, because if not, then again, bad situation. So I think it is not only responsible, but maybe the only way forward to set up adequate channels of exchange and update with industry, maybe not necessarily operators on a one-by-one basis per se, because these are your licensed supervisees. But yes, you do need to exchange with the industry, because otherwise you're defeating, or you might be exposed to be defeating yourself. This is not to say that you need to, at the same time, and this is what it's tricky, maintain, let's say, a red line, of course, because you are sanctioning, maybe you're imposing fines, you are developing policy that might not be 100% supported by operators or industry, and that is okay. But you need to indulge or engage yourself in this sort of exercise. And the same with your fellow counterparts elsewhere, Italy, Germany, Denmark, UK, of course, France, and the like.
Do you have any maybe interesting anecdotes of some of these meetings, maybe between regulators? If you could tell us how things happen, as in, is there a lot of arguing over particular jurisdictions? Is there any form of commercial thinking when going towards regulation, or is it just protection of citizens, enforcement and fines? Does the commercial enter any of these discussions?
Yeah, I would say that's a bit of everything. Okay, fair enough. 10 years ago, which is where my experience is stemming from, I guess the experience that we had was more limited than the experience that now current regulators do have. They can learn, or they have been able to learn, whether from their own mistakes or the other people's mistakes. So this is always something that enriches your position. But back in the day, it was really many of us, France, Italy, Denmark, to a certain extent, were developing the first phase of the market more or less at the same time, with then Portugal, the UK as well, in a way. So it was all a bit. There was a bit of collective learning, and so there was a lot of policy discussion. Okay, how are you guys dealing with this in your jurisdiction? Could we learn from that? We're having an issue regarding this, let's say, new development in the market that has taken place. There was a part of that. There was also a part of trying to deepen our cooperation in terms of making our markets work. And I will put you an example, which took us, maybe be a limited example, but it took us several years.
We have around 10 minutes left.
We both France, Italy, and Portugal again at the moment, and Spain. We had close liquidity, national liquidity, and this was affecting, as you know well too well, some of the products.
On a poker level, especially.
Yeah. And we set out to develop a shared liquidity scheme, which was really hard to implement. It took us, longer and harder strides than originally wanted, but this is something that was active part of the exchanges and ended up happening. So
there was something positive which came out. If I may ask, would something like shared liquidity need to go through politicians, parliament, etc., or is it purely a prerogative of the regulator? Because if it has to go through politicians and parliament, how do you explain it to them? Yeah,
well, I would say in Spain at least, we were, I don't know, maybe lucky from a regulatory perspective that we were given at the time a reasonable degree of leeway in developing the gaming product policy. Okay, unlike maybe the advertising policy or the, let's say, social broader implications of gambling, this is all political. But in terms of gaming product, whether or not to carry out another round of licensing regimes, this was dealt with within a regulatory level. So politicians or ministers liked to be informed, but did not operationally and actively engage in the wider sense. Okay, so this was the experience in Spain. Doesn't have necessarily to be the experience in elsewhere, but this is the one I had. Yeah, they were respectful.
I need to diverge a bit from gaming, but it still has an impact. So Spain, the prime minister called a snap election. I believe it's for the 23rd of July, right? So in around 6 weeks' time. Polls indicate a change in government, with Partito Popular being the favorite to win, but maybe in the need to form a coalition to govern. In your experience, I'm not asking you to predict the election, but in your experience, would such a change lead to a change in direction on how gaming is regulated in Spain? Do you believe that could happen?
Well, that's a hard one to answer, okay? But I will try.
That's why I'm asking. You are the regulator, so you dealt with these situations.
In my opinion, in terms of positioning the details and how the communication policy of the government towards gaming, betting, gambling, I think I would say that it would, such a change, if at all happened, it would involve a change in how the regulator approaches the relationship with industry stakeholders and the sort of risky overtones that normally stem from the public positioning. But I would say that by and large, in terms of regulation, I think that the pace of the regulator is, however slow or fast, I think is well set. So I would not anticipate any revolutionary overhaul in the way things are being done,
Okay.
and so we need to be cautious. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll take you up on that, but after the election result, we'll see how things. Let's see if how your prediction turns out.
We can check in. We can check in. Okay.
Another question: Do you actually gamble? So you are a regulator, but were you aware of what the products were? Were you aware of certain slots over other slots?
Well, of course. I mean, I would lie if I told you that I didn't end up knowing so much more than I used to prior to joining the regulator. But
isn't it important that as a regulator you also know the product you're regulating?
I mean, as a user, I had I would say a mainstream user or a sporadic user of casino and betting products. That knowledge, I would be, I mean, terribly honest if I said that I had a hands-on experience in the industry or as a heavy user prior to joining the DGOJ. So this was not the case in my case, but I learned fast. This I can tell.
In your time as a regulator, you must have met so many people, and so many people who would have told you, listen, it's in the industry's interest that certain things happen, or it's in another person's interest that certain things happen. How do you learn in a leadership position? How do you learn how to distinguish those people who are actually coming to you with a genuine request for the industry and those who are actually, let's say in their case, trying to safeguard the interests of their clients only?
Well, there are some rules of thumb, okay? Some of them have to do with asking the right questions. I mean, you're a lawyer yourself, you know that you can outline someone's personality and character in 2-3 questions, but without going there, I would say that in Spain we were lucky enough that after a certain moment we were generating, our operators were generating loads of data. Okay. So every claim could be contrasted with data. If not, I would kindly request to be confronted with any data. So when you narrow the issues down to available evidence, I think it is really clearer to tell out the ones who are honest, sincere, and have a legitimate claim to the ones that might not so much.
I've got the last 2 to 3 minutes. What would you say was your highlights as a regulator? But also then what would you say was your lowest moment as a regulator?
Okay, I would start by the lowest moment, okay? In my view, the fact that we couldn't, or I couldn't, get through a proper regulation, balanced and legitimate regulation of gaming advertising in due course, this is something that led me to loads of frustration, got me really frustrated, because I really think that if the chances had been to have pushed this legislation earlier in time, the situation would turn out to be much more balanced than what it ended up happening. Okay, and I think it's fair to say that we were not lucky, because we had 2 governmental overturns in a row, and it was difficult. Okay, not completely our fault, but yeah, this has been my biggest minus. On my pluses, I would say that if I were to narrow it down to one, but only one, I would say that along my term, we proved that we were a rational regulator, and one that was not business friendly per se, but that wanted to be a sustainable gaming market, in the fact that we were the first jurisdiction, if not the only one that I know of, that were able to rationalize, i.e. lower the tax regime after a certain degree of or intensity was set. So this is no easy feat, I must say. And we did it because we believed that it was on an overall program of measures that this was needed in order to introduce another measures, another set of measures that might be more burdensome, and that would amount to this channelization and balancing and all this. And this, I mean, it's not that I'm proud of that, but I think it was quite an accomplishment that was not very much maybe.
But you managed to get that because the politicians in charge understood the position, and you would have explained it thoroughly to them. So that's a huge feather in your cap. Absolutely. Unfortunately, time is up, Juan. It was a pleasure, as always, when me and you start talking.
Likewise.
But it was a pleasure to have you here as a guest. I'd also like to thank the crew who will handle the editing of this recording in order to then publish in due course. We'll be back again next week. I thank you very much for being our guest, Juan, and also I thank the followers who also a few got in touch last week. Thank you for your comments. You can also subscribe to the SiGMA podcast through SiGMA's YouTube page, and you can follow and keep updated with the developments going on. So like, follow, subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Thank you all. Good day.